Lula da Silva wins over Jair Bolsonaro in a stunning political comeback in Brazil, but the outgoing president is still to concede.
Russia launches large-scale missile strikes on Monday, hitting key infrastructure in the Ukrainian cities of Kyiv and Kharkiv.
In Brazil, left-wing candidate Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has won the presidential election in a stunning comeback. The former president saw off the far-right incumbent Jair Bolsonaro. In a divisive campaign, Lula won 50.9% of the vote. And with me now to talk about what all of this means for Brazil and nationally is our very own Jay Marquez. Jay, great to have you with us. What does this moment then mean for the country, for Brazil? And talk to me about the significance as well about the swing back to the left here.
It's absolutely huge for the country politically, Helena. Lula da Silva, as we all know, is a very famous politician, not just in Brazil but around the world, and is the only man who's managed to get into the high office 3 times now, with a very short margin this time around. But looking back at Lula's history, he has a very rich history in which he was accused of corruption multiple times. He was arrested for it. His cases were overturned by the Supreme Court, but nevertheless, it's huge. It's a huge moment because Brazil is not, some say, is not just choosing a leader, but it's choosing its own path going forward. Obviously, President Bolsonaro's time in office has been marked by a lot of dividedness and hate, to be fair. So it's an absolutely huge moment for Brazilians, not just in Brazil but around the world. Obviously, vote in Brazil is compulsory, so it's interesting that 32 million people didn't show up to vote even though it's compulsory, and that shows that for many people none of the candidates represented a viable choice. And also there's some fear of violence in exercising your democratic right.
So now going forward then, we're going to be talking about waiting for that transfer of power. What can we expect?
Inauguration is on the 1st of January, so we've got exactly 2 months between now and the transfer of power. Traditionally, presidents, they hand over to each other. The outgoing president hands over a presidential sash to the incoming president. But it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to happen, because Bolsonaro and Lula, they don't look eye to eye. Even in the latest debates, they couldn't even stand next to each other. They don't look at each other. So that's going to be interesting to see with the ceremonial that's meant to be taking place on the 1st of January, but in the next two months as well, it's going to be interesting to see how President Bolsonaro is going to react. There are hints that he wouldn't go easily. He hinted many times he didn't trust the electronic machines that we use in Brazil to vote. He attacked democratic institutions in Brazil, the Supreme Court, the Constitution itself. He's got some cases that he still has to answer to in attacking the Constitution itself. So next 2 months, very interesting.
Ukraine has been hit by another wave of overnight air attacks. These images released by Russia's defense ministry purport to show the launch of missiles towards Ukraine. It's not clear where they were filmed. But Ukrainian authorities have confirmed several places across the country were hit, including Kyiv and Kharkiv. Other locations included Zaporizhia, Cherkasy, Kirovohrad and Vinnytsia. Ukraine's armed forces claim to have shot down 44 of 50 missiles launched into its territory. Critical infrastructure was said to have been hit, but it's not yet clear if there were casualties.
As the war rages on in Ukraine and attacks carried out by Russia, locals pick up the pieces of the destruction and face into another week of power and water cuts. Meanwhile, in Brussels, the face of the Ukrainian women's movement, Femin, tells Euronews why Ukrainians, despite everything, will never give up the fight.
Ukrainians are literally dying today for their choice, for taking courage and to become a democratic country, for taking courage to decouple themselves from Russian world model and fight for their right to become truly European, independent, democratic state. That's the root of this war. That's the reason why Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine.
Speaking on the fringes of a Friends of Europe event in Brussels, Ina says she expected the attack on the 24th of February to occur, that she'd been alarming the world about appeasing Vladimir Putin for years. She says the war has now united the country and turned singers, bakers and teachers into soldiers, and their morale is still high.
There is a collective suffering of the whole nation, but there is also a collective powerful resistance. Ukrainians know that once again, as we repeat always, if Russia stops fighting Ukrainians, there won't be war. If Ukrainians will stop fighting, there won't be Ukraine.
Many argue if it wasn't for Ukrainian civil society and the private sector inside and outside the country, Ukraine's military would have been outpowered by Russia. Maeve McMahon, Euronews, Brussels.
Campaign posters are a common sight here, as on Tuesday Israel holds its 5th election in 4 years. But for the first time in a while, the country's longest-serving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be campaigning from the opposition. He's up against caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid, a centrist who ousted the right-winger last year.
In my opinion, there's no chance this will be the last round of elections. It doesn't seem to be the case. Many people I know are simply desperate, and the despair comes from not seeing the horizon, not seeing any future stability, or any solid line for a period that's long enough.
I don't even know who to vote for. It's terribly confusing, and I don't really understand it either. The feeling that there's no one to trust.
Despite his ongoing corruption trial, Netanyahu hopes his record of 15 years in power will convince voters he's the man to lead the country. But Lapid enters the election off the back of a diplomatic breakthrough with Lebanon, having brokered a deal that unlocks offshore gas riches for both sides. The frontrunners will need to keep energy high as they negotiate with smaller parties to reach a majority in the Knesset.
Danes head to the polls on Tuesday in an election called by Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen earlier than protocol dictates. Frederiksen, the leader of the Social Democrats, is presiding over a minority government and decided to hold an early vote after an ally threatened to leave her ruling coalition. She's also been under pressure by those who think she didn't act fast enough to slaughter minks infected with COVID during the pandemic. Latest surveys say her leftist Red Bloc and the right-wing bloc, led by Liberal politicians, are in a neck-and-neck race for parliamentary seats. In a televised debate, Frederiksen said that the election campaign has brought coalition partners closer together, but that it's not enough. She said all parties have to join forces like they did during the pandemic in order to overcome the present challenges, such as recession, immigration, education and a labour crisis. But the leader of the newly formed Moderates Party said it's Frederiksen's current government that's responsible for creating conflict. People are angrily screaming when they agree on most topics. Our main goal is to get rid of radical politicians, he said, alluding to the fact that the Red-Green Eco Party has sabotaged the government's work on several occasions. Wherever the blame lies, it will ultimately be the voters on Tuesday who decide the makeup of the next Danish government.
Thousands of protesters marched in the streets of Copenhagen on Sunday, demanding climate issues be at the center of Denmark's upcoming general election. The People's Climate March was staged just 2 days before the country heads to the polls on November 1st in a snap election. Those taking part say they want action, not just words, from the next government. Greta Thunberg has said that she will not be attending COP27 in Egypt, calling the UN climate conference greenwashing. The Swedish climate activist argued the event is used by attending world leaders to gain attention and only has limited space for civil society. She has also previously tweeted solidarity for prisoners of conscience being held in Egypt.